Let's do this design and this blend together. Stay tuned, y'all. Welcome back to another chooch tutorial. If this is your first time watching one of my videos, be sure to subscribe. And if you're a returning viewer, thank you for watching another one of my videos. So let's jump straight into it. This is how my client walked in. And before starting anything, I'm gonna comb or brush out the client's hair. We wanna make sure nothing is tangled up and combed out. That way when we pass our clippers, it will just cut straight clean. Here I'm using a pretty stiff bristle brush just to comb out the hair from the top. Since my client's hair texture is a bit curly, I don't want nothing curled up. I just want to lay it down flat as possible. To take down some of the bulk, I'm going to start off with the number 3 guard and the lever all the way open. Now I'm going to bring this up to the disconnection and just flick out a little bit towards the top. That way it can still have a little bit of bulk towards the separation line. Just to smooth everything out, with the 1.5 guard, going with the lever all the way open and just going with the grain. That way we can cut any hairs that were lifted up during the process. Now that we took care of the bulk, let's start putting in our first line with our trimmer. And this is going to be a mid drop fade. And I'm going to create my guideline in 2 sections. I create my starting point and then my ending point and then connect them. This way we can get the most consistent line possible. Right away, I'm just gonna clear out all the hair below that line that we just created. There are a lot of misconceptions. If you take out the C-cup arch, it automatically becomes a high fade, but that's not the case. It all depends on how high you put the bald line and the given space that our client has. So this would still be considered a mid drop fade, even though we took off the C-cup. And just to smooth everything out, I'm going to use my foil shavers and just bald out the area that we just cleared. This will make the haircut last longer and just add a better transition to our blend. The first guard we'll be using is the 1.5 guard, and I'm doing this with the lever all the way closed. I'm going to go up about 2 fingers high, and I'm just going to follow that first line we created. Try to keep this as consistent as possible. We will be using a 3-step lever technique, so try to memorize these steps because it's the same pattern we'll be using throughout the entire haircut. And if you can't keep track of my lever position, just look at the top right corner. As soon as we're done putting in that first line, I'm going to open the lever halfway and go up another 1/4 inch right above that. With this step, we're not trying to create another guideline, we're just going to smooth out the top. As I'm doing this, I'm flicking out to prevent creating a harsh line. And it's okay if you go over the same area a few times just to make sure everything's blending smoothly. Lastly, I'll finally open the lever completely and just flick out another 1/4 inch. This will blend in with the 3 guard open if you're flicking out appropriately. So really what we're doing here is establishing the highest point of our blend. We won't be going above this area, so try to keep that in mind. Also, the higher we're going, the less pressure I'm applying with my clipper and the more I'm flicking out to ease that. Once I complete all 3 lever positions, I just repeat the same steps and start from the bottom and work my way up just to touch up any areas that I missed. And if you do notice, as I'm going higher, I adjust my clipper at an angle. This allows me to just use the corners of my blade so I can be more careful and not accidentally cut an area that we're not focusing on. So just a little recap with the lever positions. Starting with the lever completely closed, opening it halfway, and finally completely open. It's the same technique we'll use for every guard that we'll be using. I'll be taking that guard off and going up about a finger's width with the lever all the way open. And I'm just following that initial bald line that we created. That's why it's very important to take your time doing that step because it's the same guideline that we'll be using throughout the entire cut. And I do go over this area a few times just to make sure everything's being cut consistently, and it'll help us minimize time when it comes to blending and detailing later on. And the last guard we'll be using to connect this blend is the 0.5 guard, and I'm starting off with the lever completely closed. And I'm just going to flick a 1/4 inch at that darker line. At the very bottom of this line is where we're applying the most pressure because we really want to get it out. But as we're going higher, I'm applying less pressure to not create any dark lines. So now I'm gonna open that lever halfway and just flick out another 1/4 inch. And as we can see, this line is already softening up. And lastly, I'll open the lever completely and just flick out any darker areas. This will blend in to the 1.5 guard. Just keep in mind where it is that we cut with the 1.5 guard and not go above that area. So pay attention to how I'm holding my clipper at an angle as I'm cutting higher. I usually always do this when I get to the lever completely open for the same reason, just to target the areas a little more accurately. After completing all 3 lever positions, this is pretty blended already. All we gotta do is just take out that bottom bald line. All I'm doing here is just touching up my work, playing with the lever a little bit. To blend out the last line, I make sure I use a clipper with a fade blade. That way we can get closer to the skin. And I'm starting off with that lever closed and just really keep in mind to flick out that line. This is where you have to be most careful, because if you're not, you can easily bring this fade up higher. And obviously we don't want to do that. If you can't get it out completely the first time around, that's okay. You can always just go back and redo the steps rather than bringing up the fade higher and higher and just messing up the whole blend. So just keep in mind, being light-handed and flicking out is extremely important with this last step. And don't worry too much about getting all the dark spots out right away. As long as you don't see a harsh line, you're doing good. You can always go back after the cut to detail later on. And just like that, we already completed this blend. There's no need to use 4, 5, 6 guards on one cut. It's just understanding the system and applying it to your haircuts. So you can use this method for any length, any texture, it doesn't matter. You just got to remember to flick out. That's the #1 thing with this technique. And whatever my clipper doesn't get, I go right behind it with my trimmer, since this does have a thinner blade and it does get closer to the skin. But same thing, I'm not using the entire blade. I'm using the corners. That way I can really attack the smaller, darker areas more accurately. And we're just gonna rinse and repeat these steps all the way through around his head. Nothing changes except the area that we're working on. And since it is a little bit wider, so I'm creating my guidelines just a tad bit thicker. But the steps are the same. And I use the blend on his side that's already complete as a guide. That way his fade won't be lopsided or anything. Also really quick, all of the tools that I'm using in this video are by Gamma or Stylecraft. And if you're in the market for any, be sure to use my discount code chooch and you can save some nice money off your purchase. The code is valid for both websites, so be sure to use that. And if you haven't already, be sure to check out all my other tutorials here on YouTube. I cut a lot of different styles and textures using this same technique. We're going to be moving over to his left side, and as I stated at the beginning of the video, he did have a design previously done, so I'm going to soften this out with the 1.5 guard with the lever all the way open, just at the highest point of where I can still see the design. And right below that, I'll go ahead and close my lever to try to make these lines as blended as possible. Usually whenever a client asks for a design, I like to do that before setting in my fade. That way we can just fade around the design and we won't accidentally cut any hair that was needed. But I do set in my bald line first. That way I know the height of the fade. Obviously it all depends on what design you're going to be doing though. Preferably for designs, I use a smaller blade. This is the one blade from Gamma. That's because designs require you to be a little bit more precise, so I don't want a bulky blade. I am going to create a heart shape, but just how I did my bald line, I'm going to create a starting point and an ending point for the same reason, so this can try to be as even as possible and a real consistent line. With designs, you can't put the hair back, you can't erase it, so you have to get it right the first time. I do know some people prefer to draw it out first with like a white Barber pencil. but I just feel like it gets in the way with the hair, and once you clean it off, it just looks a little choppy, so I'd rather not use that. But honestly, whatever works for you. There's no right or wrong way to cut hair. As long as you get the same end result, that's what matters. I'm gonna connect the line right off the heart. Notice how I did that in 2 parts as well. I just find it a little bit easier when you create the starting point and the ending point. And instead of using shaving gel, I'm just gonna apply some water. Reason being is that the shaving gel, I just find it to get in the way when it comes to designs. Sometimes it makes me make the line a lot thicker than what I wanted it to be because the shaving gel was in the way. So I'd rather just put some water. And once the design is complete, I'm gonna use the same steps to blend this out. I'm just being courteous of the design and blending around it, trying to keep where the lines are dark. We're gonna move over to his hairline, and I am gonna bring this down a bit with the 1.5 guard open, just because I thought it was a little bit bulky, and his hair is thin, so I didn't want to trim it down too much. But if it was thicker, then I'd probably do it with the lever closed. We are gonna use some spritz, but I'm not gonna spray directly on him because I don't want it to be messy, so I'm just gonna dab it with a paper towel. This is gonna add a nice hold so his hairs can lay flat and won't move with the blades from the trimmer. I'm gonna just top this off with the light hold hairspray. And to facilitate the drying process, I'm just gonna use a little blow dryer. Once everything's dry, we can start the lining up process. I generally always start in the center and then move towards the sides little by little. Just keep in mind that we're creating a straight line on a round canvas, so it's very important to follow the shape of his forehead as you're doing this. And don't forget to use the mirror behind you. The mirror is a very important tool. This adds distance, so instead of taking a step back, just look in the mirror. It'll help you realize if the hairline is straight or not. It's like when you're hanging up a frame on the wall and you take a step back to see if it's straight. That's exactly what the mirror does. My client did tell me he wanted some enhancements, so I'm gonna spray a little bit where his hair is thinner, just to give it the illusion of a fuller hairline. And don't forget to touch it up after you spray the enhancements. And this is the final look, guys. Nice and clean blend with the design. You know, this boy's heartbroken. But if you learned anything in this video, please leave it a like. Also share it to one of your barber friends, you know, one of your co-workers. Let's make cutting hair easier. You don't gotta complicate things. If you're having some trouble understanding this technique, or if you got any questions, be sure to let me know in the comments below. I'll do my best to answer as many as I can. Also, if you got any suggestions of what kind of haircuts you want to look for, or what kind of content you're expecting from me, be sure to let me know that as well. But anyways, I had a lot of fun doing this cut. If you guys replicate this design, be sure to tag me. I'll repost it on my story. Be sure to check out all of my other social media accounts. I'm pretty active on those. But as always, stay blessed and peace out.